Okay,
Smile.
so this is November 18th, 2008, and I'm Sue Hetmansberger, the daughter of Dorothy and Hilton Hetmansberger, and we're going to record some memories of my mother when she was involved in the war effort, when she was working at Goodrich Tire in Ohio, and my father is here also to augment the memories for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. I'll go off camera now and have them talk. Hi. So Dorothy Stone originally, Dorothy Ellen Stone, and you were working at the Goodrich Company when
Goodrich Rubber Company.
Doing comptometer work.
Yes.
And that was an early form of computation, computing.
Yes.
To log data for the company.
It was a rubber company, and it was in the war effort, of course. And so everything we did was not talked about at that time.
But you had control of the rubber that came from South America being used to make tires.
They used it to make tires for the war effort.
Okay, all right.
So your job was keeping track of the materials that came in on these long poles that had the
raw rubber on from South America.
From the rubber trees. Okay.
Huge wrapped poles with this
big, heavy loads of raw rubber on it.
And your dad worked there too.
My dad worked there too.
The color just went off.
What was the history of the rubber products turning to artificial rubber too? That had to do with the war effort, didn't it? That they finally they moved toward an artificial
other ways
substitute for natural rubber.
Substitutes for natural rubber, yes, they had to.
Since they couldn't get natural rubber easily, they had a plant called Waiuli, which was a type of rubber. So they experimented with all different types of rubber byproducts, so to try to make tires for the various vehicles that had to be used overseas. Because every Jeep or machine that ran on rubber had to have a tire made by some manufacturing company. And so there was not just the Goodrich, there was a Goodyear and Firestone and General, which made tires for the various vehicle, Army and mostly Army vehicles, because the Navy was mostly aboard ship. However, some of the navies were land-based, and they had to have Jeeps and that sort of vehicle.
Did you know much about what Hitler had done? And I suppose you knew.
Oh, you knew quite a bit about what he did. His killing of the Jews and all of that, and trying to go into Russia, and he sent his troops into Russia without proper apparel, with not heavy boots that would withstand the cold and the snow, and many of them succumbed to the cold because of that.
Hitler was a very bad guy.
Life was good in combustion. Did you end up making the change? You end up going to Sunny Daisy?
Yes.
Or Daisy?
Yes, Daisy at that time.
Did you do your schooling at UC to prepare for all that?
Yeah, I got my accounting degree at UC.
So you're just one educated fellow.
Well, then B. Mifflin Hood, will make a long story short, was the largest clay manufacturer in brick tile in the world at that time. Had 17 plants in 7 states.
Wow.
And but they made a mistake by not hiring a German engineer. After World War II, a lot of German engineers came over here with a lot of good information. But Sam J. McAllister was chairman of the board at that time, and he went on a trip to Europe. And while he was gone, we'll make a long story short, I guess. The company paid $100,000 a year. This is back in late 40s, and early 50s. The New York Institute of Tile Manufacturers. So they had this German engineer that came over here that they made tile and stuff in Germany with beehive kilns like all the companies over in the United States had. Took 15 days by the time you put the tile in till you took it out. That guy said he could do it in 52 hours by building a tunnel kiln. So at that time, like I say, B.B. Hood was the largest manufacturer and the most profitable one in the world at that time. So my uncle and the 4 other stockholders decided to go ahead without the judge's permission. So he stayed 3 or 4 months. When they come back, the foundation was already made for the tunnel kiln, and it was already up. The deal was, if the tunnel kiln didn't work, you paid him $600,000. If it did work, you paid him $1 million. And judge come back and canceled it and fired all of us at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But about 3 o'clock in the morning, next morning, he hired us all back. But then this guy went to Mosaic Tile Company and built a tunnel kiln. And in 1 year, we were out of business.
Wow.
It cost us cost us 28 cents a square foot to manufacture quarry tile. He was selling it for 8 and 9 cents a square foot. If we got 50% standard grade tile, we were making a fortune. But he was getting 97 to 100% standard grade. So he flooded the market. Mosaic Tile, which you see them advertised today, they're the largest one in the world at this time.
Along the way, both from the start, when you talked about growing up in Daisy,
Yeah.
to your flight group that you flew with, to even coming home and your dad getting on you about drinking and just RCs. Families always seem to be an important part of your life.
Yes.
How did your family develop after you got back and as you took on your own family?
Just fine. We've always been a close-knit family. Like I say, we grew up together. Cleo and I played together as we grew up. We were about a quarter of a mile apart, I guess. But that's next door out in the country, you know.
Yeah. And you were married when?
February the 8th, 1948.
And any kids?
Yes, have 3 daughters.
Grandkids?
No grandkids.
Okay. So life's been good.
Sure has.
When you sit here now and you think about, as you've reflected and shared your stories and your insights on your experiences during the service, if it's at all possible, give me a summary statement of your military experience and what impact, if any, it had on your life.
Well, it had a great deal because I guess the most thing, I grew up.
I think that was a big part of it all.
Yeah. Grew up and accepted responsibilities that was put before us. I mean, we were dictated. In the service, you never said no. If they said, we got to bomb that Pulaski oil fields, and they got 1,000 guns, that's what they told us at that time. They got 1,000 guns guarding that oil field. We didn't think about not saying no, or we might get killed or something. I reckon it taught you the responsibility.
With your experiences in the service and your experiences in life, here we sit in 2003 with another crisis.
Yes.
Define freedom for me. What does freedom mean to you?
Being able to, well, I know it's hard to explain. Being able to do what you would like to do, be considerate of others, and be ready to help your fellow man in their time of trouble or time of help.
When you think about this being available at the Library of Congress for generations to come, what message would you like them to hear from you?
Well, whenever expectations come your way, do your best to solve them in a way that will be beneficial to all concerned.
Any other thoughts that you want to share?
Well, I worked 46 years for one electrical contractor. I was vice president and treasurer of that corporation. Then I just retired January the 1st of this year. I got 78, so I figured that's time to retire. But I'm still in excellent health. And I worked three years and 3 months for Adman Electric locally here. I've had an enjoyable time. I met a lot of people. That's one reason I didn't retire early. I enjoyed my work. I enjoyed meeting all kinds of people. Well, I guess I could say the world has been good to me. I have a wonderful family, and I've been pretty successful in life. I've enjoyed it. And I like to give back what's been given unto me.
Good stuff.
Today, government support for scientific research, especially at the most basic level, is taken for granted. This was not always the case. Traditionally, what passed for scientific inquiry was supported by individual fortunes or by wealthy sponsors. After the creation of the United States, even inquisitive, science-minded chief executives found it difficult to expand support for American science beyond private philanthropy, primarily due to the strict reading of the Constitution by states' rights advocates. There was no explicit mandate to support science, so any federal support to efforts such as the Lewis and Clark expedition, the founding of the Naval Observatory in 1830, or geological surveying and mapping projects had to be justified under the Constitution's Article 1, Section 8, admonition to Congress to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. Thus, science had to be good for business. In the middle of all this, a wealthy British chemist inadvertently threw a constitutional hand grenade. James Smithson, never married and without children, died in 1829, leaving his considerable estate to his nephew. Said nephew, likewise unmarried and without heirs, had the audacity to pass away himself in 1835. Anticipating this, Smithson had stipulated that the next use of his endowment would be to found in Washington, a place he had never visited, under the name of the Smithsonian Institution, an establishment for the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. Congress belatedly accepted the bequest in 1838 and started 7 years of haggling over what the ensuing institution should be: a library, a university, a museum, or something else. Its first secretary, Joseph Henry, steered it into becoming a center for scientific learning. At the same time, the benefits of scientific enhancements to the nation's dominant agriculture economy were becoming apparent, especially along the agriculture-dominated frontier of the Midwest. Prodded by Professor Jonathan Baldwin Turner of Illinois College, Representative Justin Smith Morrill of Vermont introduced a bill in Congress in 1857 to grant tracts of federal land to the states for the purposes of established agricultural colleges. It finally passed both houses in 1859, but was vetoed by President James Buchanan on a strictly delineated constitutional grounds argument. The states' rights obstacle soon resolved itself, though, through secession. When the congressional delegations of the 11 seceded southern states absented themselves from Washington, Morrill reintroduced his land grant bill, which was enacted in 1862. giving us what are now known as land-grant colleges. Upon the outbreak of the Civil War, all manner of inventors flocked to the Capitol to offer up their devices for the war effort. We've all heard stories of individuals showing up at the War and Navy departments, and even at the White House, even eager to demonstrate the effectiveness of their projects. It soon got so bad that the Secretary of the Navy appointed a Navy Department Permanent Commission of 3 scientists to screen the flood of suggestions. At the same time, a group of 3 scientists, Alexander Bache, a geographer, Louis Agassiz, a biologist, and Charles Henry Davis, a Navy astronomer, persuaded Senator Henry Wilson of Massachusetts to introduce a bill that would put a new scientific community at the service of the federal government to investigate, experiment, and report on any subject when requested by a federal department. The bill was one among dozens that were enacted on the last day of the lame duck session of the 37th Congress, and that established the National Academy of Sciences. In large part, that response took the form of a new National Defense Research Committee, or NDRC. The 3 individuals most responsible for its creation and effectiveness were Vannevar Bush, president of the Carnegie Institute of Washington, James Conant, a physicist and the president of Harvard University, and Carl Compton. They and others used the experience of World War I and Compton's 1930s studies to develop a different organization for supporting the coming war effort. The lead individual was Bush, who used his relationship with Frederick Delano to gain an audience in early 1940 with FDR's close advisor, Harry Hopkins. At that meeting, he outlined an organization that could leverage the prestige of its central actors to become the interface between the existing university research organization and the War and Navy departments, revising and using the existing authority of the Council of National Defense. Bush proposed a National Defense Research Committee that would be created by the president within his Office for Emergency Management under his special emergency powers that existed in 1940. The committee would be empowered to support research on the mechanisms of warfare, except where those activities would overlap with the NACA or the War or Navy departments. Importantly, this NDRC would undertake its own research on instrumentalities, methods, and materials of warfare. Lacking any direct statutory authority, the NDRC would be funded by the president's emergency funds that had been made available to him by Congress. Hopkins persuaded FDR to meet with Bush on June 16, 1940, and the president gave his immediate approval. The NDRC officially stood up on 27 June 1940. During World War II, more than 16 million Americans served in uniform in a country that then numbered about 200 million. Today, our active military numbers are less than 1 million in a country of about 380 million. In World War II, money for projects was plentiful, but trained technical people were not. The services needed to bring in soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines at an ever-quickening pace, and eventually, even the most highly skilled scientists were likely to be called up. The impact of the loss of just a few trained technical people could cripple research programs. So this agency, the Agency Committee on Selective Service, and Bush himself were heavily involved in securing draft deferments for critical personnel. Let's turn to the practices that OSRD and its subordinates put in place to prosecute their mission. Project initiation. Projects could be initiated by a request from one of the services, the War and Navy departments, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, or by the Allies, the British, the French in exile, et cetera, or on NDRC's or OSRD's own initiative. Constant and close liaison through the Office of Field Services and the rotation of operational personnel through the research labs as they came back from the field kept everyone abreast of current operations and the needs of those who were in combat. Development and patent registration. The labs would develop a project to a certain point, and when patents became necessary in order to protect the intellectual property, the practice was that the Office of OSRD itself would register the patents and register them to the United States government. However, once done, Those would be freely available for licensing at no charge to virtually anybody who wanted. Okay, post-war scientific research. What happened after the war was over? Well, OSRD wound down almost immediately to be replaced by a permanent entity. Bush's idea was that we wanted to institutionalize the federal funding of basic scientific research, and this was an opportunity to do it. There was a consensus on the need for federally funded basic scientific research, but not on the form or the mandate. So essentially, two camps were created to conceptualize what became the National Science Foundation. You had Bush on one side, and you had Senator Harvey Kilgore of West Virginia on the other. Bush was a classic technocrat. He wanted everything done by the merits of the individual project, including the organization that would be administering it. Kilgore, on the other hand, was a dyed-in-the-wool New Dealer. He wanted to make sure that the entire country benefited from this, and the research that they would fund would be socially relevant. And in the end, President Truman got into the act. So we essentially had a trifecta. The original 1946 proposals for the National Science Foundation, both Bush and Kilgore agreed that a central federal research agency was necessary, that the natural sciences should be an object of research, medicine should be researched, defense should be researched. Social science research, not so much. On Bush's side, he was a natural scientist at heart, even though he was only an engineer. And Kilgore, on the other hand, thought that was a great idea. Geographic dispersion of support, Bush didn't care, Kilgore did. Applied research. Bush didn't want to have anything to do with applied research because that would detract from the basic research mandate that was supposed to be at the heart of this. Kilgore, on the other hand, wanted to see some sort of social benefit come out of this. So his proposal included all of that. Patent ownership, Bush pressed for private ownership of federally funded research. Kilgore thought it should be the ownership, they should stay with the government. Political control of the foundation. This would be the appointment of the senior officers, et cetera, and oversight by Congress. Bush, not so much. He wanted the technocrats to run the show. Kilgore, on the other hand, he thought it was a good idea. And should it be independent of the executive agencies? Both thought that was a great idea, much as OSRD had been.
For, as Americans were becoming producers of industrial goods, they were also becoming regular consumers of once exotic goods from the Caribbean and the Pacific. You may have had some of these for breakfast today: the banana, the pineapple, and coffee. Tropical fruits are just the most visible manifestation of a trade that included hardwoods, dyes, varnishes, natural rubber, and gutta percha, which lined the underseas cables connecting the globe. Scholars have interpreted the Philippine homestead law as a sincere, if misguided, effort to make small farmers out of Filipinos. In actuality, U.S. land law upon annexation declared all lands not publicly owned to be private, which in turn categorized hundreds of thousands of small cultivators without official titles as squatters. The homestead program would have these small cultivators pay application costs, survey fees, and taxes on lands they had already considered their own in exchange for official state recognition. It was not, as you can imagine, very popular, and the Bureau of Forestry bore the imprint of Gifford Pinchot, who, as head of a very fledgling U.S. Forestry Service, was an apostle of scientific conservation in the U.S. The Philippines was, as to quote, a botanist's paradise, a region in which an ardent naturalist might browse for years and still have new treasures to find. His 7,000 islands teemed with an amazing tropical growth. He said there were no barren stretches of land, no drought-stricken shores, but instead an abundant rainfall, an equable climate, a rich soil, and the warm influences of equatorial waters. He exaggerated the forest wealth, saying everywhere is a wealth of trees, from the mountains right down to the ocean shore, and continued that the people of the Philippine Islands were not wealthy and that Philippine products did not dominate world trade, not because the islands were not inherently naturally wealthy, but because the Spanish looked upon nature with a lazy eye, his quote, and could not be troubled about anything that cannot be put to some immediate use. American forces in 1898 simply exasperated these problems. American forces burned fields, halted the inter-island food trade. Reports of soldiers in Cuba sickened by tinned meat from Chicago, what was known as the embalmed food scandal, forced the commissary to commandeer scarce local meats. Southwestern Luzon, which had been host to the fiercest and most prolonged fighting, had been completely cut off from food supplies and not coincidentally surrendered at the start of the planting season in 1902. Coconuts were not strictly a food resource. French agricultural experiment stations in Africa had revealed that coconuts could be processed to produce nitroglycerin. The U.S. colonial government, after disparaging Spanish land law, had essentially argued that Carino failed to gain legal title as per those 1893 Spanish decrees discussed earlier. His land, they held, had legally reverted to the crown and hence to the U.S. with the transfer of sovereignty. Carino instead argued that he had prior, quote, vested rights based on his family use. In 1909, the Supreme Court decided in Carino's favor. Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote in the majority opinion that to deny Carino's claim was a violation of the 1902 Organic Act for the Philippines, which declared, quote, "No law shall be enacted which shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." The court essentially refused to declare unhispanicized Filipinos squatters on their own land, recognizing vested rights. American laws, which favored private owners, became, in the hands of this Ibaloy man, a very powerful tool for the protection of indigenous land rights, despite the intent of the law's founders to promote commercial development. This Carino doctrine did not have a widespread and immediate impact until the 1970s and 1980s, when human rights lawyers resuscitated it, and they're the ones who are now calling it the Carino doctrine. And it's, I guess, ironic then that American law is now used to make a case for the protection of ancestral land rights.
Washoy, washoy, washoy. And as they got closer to our block, they'd get louder, washoy, 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 as they jogged off.
I think it meant, I can't recall exactly what I thought, but I think it meant that I knew that I would be going in service.
Mhm.
And then later on that month, just a couple of weeks later, there was an ad in the paper soliciting people to register for employment at Huntsville Arsenal.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, I can do that.
Mhm.
And I applied and was accepted to work at Huntsville Arsenal.
And what did you do at the arsenal?
I was an equipment operator and manufacturer of mustard gas.
Now, you say we were manufacturing mustard gas, but
Yes.
we didn't use mustard gas during the war.
No, but we had vast supplies of it. It was being, even before World War II,
Mhm.
we were making mustard gas at Edgewood Arsenal
Mhm.
because of the experience that we had had in World War I.
Mhm.
We knew that if and when there was another war, that perhaps it would be used.
Mhm.
And we were producing massive stocks even at that time, not only mustard gas, but other gases products too.
Now, were you making just the chemical itself, or were you making the munitions?
Now we're just making the chemical to load the munitions with.
Okay. In the plant, were there any problems in the plant or any leaks that you know of?
Not any massive problems. There would be problems, minor leaks from time to time. We had to wear special impregnated clothing to work in the plant. And you go in your civilian clothes, and you would go through a locker room and take off your civilian clothes and put on the impregnated clothing. Then after you'd worked in the plant, you came to a shower room before you dressed in your civilian clothes to go out again.
Okay.
And I worked there for about, I say about 8 or 10 months.
Yes.
So now we're getting into the summer of 42?
Right. And I enlisted at the 26th of August, 1942. I enlisted in the...
The next time you have a cup of tea, perhaps you should thank Robert Fortune. In order to develop tea plantations in the Himalayas of India, the East India Company hired Fortune to uncover the plants and methods China used in producing its unrivaled tea. This was a challenging and potentially dangerous mission, since the Chinese carefully protected this information, especially from foreigners. Being of Scottish descent, Fortune realized it would be necessary to travel in Chinese disguise. He had his head shaved, donned a braid, dressed like the locals, learned to speak Mandarin, and adopted Chinese customs in order to venture far into the remote areas of China. He traveled in a sedan chair carried by coolies, as did the dignitaries, in order to gain proper respect and admittance through city and village gates. Fortune had some close calls, but avoided being detected as an impostor. He successfully discovered the coveted secrets of propagating, processing, and packing tea. Fortune helped to end the Chinese monopoly on tea by obtaining tea plants, equipment, and tea experts to establish government tea plantations in the Himalayas. David Fairchild was a plant explorer for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. According to staff at the Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden, his far-reaching travels brought into cultivation in the U.S. many important plants, including mangoes, nectarines, dates, horseradish, bamboo, and flowering cherries. When in Corsica to cut citron scions, Fairchild was almost detained as a spy. The guard reluctantly released him when Fairchild insisted that a U.S. Treasury check found in his pocket was his paper of citizenship. Fairchild remarked,
"I left the town as quickly as I could, cutting from some citron trees as I went. It was my pleasure 10 years after this to visit in Southern California the orchard that was the result of the introduction of these scions."
Well, of course, this is Washington.
in the May 21, 1910 Gardener's Chronicle, the plant explorer George Forrest wrote,
"Few realize the great hardships and dangers which have to be faced in order to secure new plants for cultivation. In the warmer regions, there is danger from miasma, fever, animals, and snakes. Not infrequently, too, the collector has to seek his specimens among savage or semi-civilized peoples, who in most instances strongly resent his intrusion into their midst."
Had been Europe's experience with smallpox before that?
This is a really complex and interesting question. There have been a number of scholars in recent years who've actually gone back and looked at some of the death records from France and Italy to actually seem to track what the mortality rates and what the effect of smallpox was on the European populations. This is well before the conquest in the Middle Ages and sort of into the early modern period. And what they found is that even though the mortality rate of the disease is fairly high, so 20 to 30% for the variola virus, which is the virus we're really talking about that causes smallpox, there didn't seem to be any large-scale epidemics. It seems to be very localized. It seems 20 to 30% of the people died. The rest of the people may have gotten the disease and recovered and developed some kind of immunity to it. The smallpox is a very interesting virus. It has a lot in common with COVID-19, but there is a lot that is very different. It has lots of different animal hosts. It's related to things like cowpox and monkeypox and a whole series of other other diseases, other viruses. The real evolutionary question for the smallpox virus is, why is it is one of those viruses that is only found in humans. But as far as the European experience beforehand, there were people who died. It was an important disease, but there don't seem to have been any large-scale pandemics.
Had Europeans, including the Spanish, of course, had they become immune to it by 1492 when Columbus's expedition first arrived in Hispaniola?
Well, that's an interesting question. You know, the virus itself has a peculiar history as far as that goes. Modern science has kind of started to look at the sort of genomics of the smallpox of that period. And there have been some really interesting discoveries in recent years. There's a particular child mummy from Vilnius who died in between 1643 and 1665. That we've actually looked at very closely and sequenced some of the genome and looked at some of the diseases that were in the fleshy surviving parts of that particular child mummy. And what has been found is that the smallpox that is in that particular mummy has very, very, very much in common with the modern strains. Things like its gene degradation timing and all that kind of stuff have shown that really this is a particularly virulent strain of smallpox that seems to have actually come into existence at the end of the 15th and beginning of the 16th century, kind of just in time for its importation into the New World. So there was some immunity, obviously, with a 20%, 30% mortality rate. Many people recovered, and there definitely was immunity by the time they arrived in the Americas. But there was still plenty of Europeans dying of smallpox.
We had captured the island.
There was some fierce fighting then, wasn't there?
Very fierce. The first group came ashore, and we were overwhelmed because they were right on the beach with us. In some places, it was practically hand to hand. Stock of your rifles on your side, and the barrel was right in their stomachs.
I understand that you didn't take any Japanese prisoners, hardly.
No, the Japanese prisoners that were there were dedicated, more or less dedicated Japanese soldiers who believed in hara-kiri or committing suicide before they were captured. So most of the Japanese soldiers killed themselves or were killed by us, or they swam out to the ocean and drowned. We only took 2 prisoners. There was only 2 Japanese prisoners taken at the time, and they told our interpreters that they could not be, their name could not be released, and they could not go back to Japan because they would be killed.
My father came into our bedroom that I shared with my brother a year younger. Henry was 4, I was 5, and we had a baby sister. Reiko was a baby, an infant. She was in a cradle in my parents' bedroom. My father came into our bedroom, dressed us hurriedly, and told us to play in the living room. There's nothing to do there. So we were just gazing out the front window when suddenly we saw 2 soldiers marching up our driveway. They carried rifles with shiny knives attached to it. That's it right there. And they stomped up the front porch, and our front window that we were looking out was right in front of us. And they went to the front door and banged on the door with their fist. We were terrified. My father came out, answered the door, and one of the soldiers pointed his bayonet at our father. Henry and I were standing there petrified. And the soldier said, "Get your family out of this house." As clearly and bluntly as that. My father said, "I need 10 more minutes." And he went back and came out shortly with 2 boxes about this size, tied in twine for Henry and me to carry. And then he went back and came out with 2 heavy suitcases. And he said, "Follow me." And we followed him out onto the driveway and waited for our mother. And when she finally came out, escorted by the the soldier who pointed the bayonet at my father. My mother came out. She had our baby sister in one arm and a heavy duffel bag in the other, and tears were streaming down her face. That is a morning I can never forget.
It's important to mention that your father is immigrated to the U.S. and your mother was born in the U.S., so which makes it doubling mortifying, honestly, that an American citizen could be treated that way.
She was born in Sacramento, California. My grandparents immigrated to Sacramento in the 1890s, and all my uncles and aunts were born in Sacramento. My father was born in Japan, but he lost his mother when he was very tiny, and his widower father, my grandfather, decided to start life anew in America. And he he sailed to San Francisco with my father and his older brother. And so my father, born in Japan, was raised and educated, went to college in San Francisco. He spoke both English and Japanese fluently. Actually, his English was better than my mother's because she was actually raised in a part of the Sacramento Delta that was called Florin at that time. But now it's been engulfed by Sacramento, and the only evidence of Florin having been there is Florin Boulevard there. And there they had segregated education. Rural California wasn't too different from the American South. A different school for Asian and Latino kids, and another school, a superior school, for the white kids.
Speaking of the American South, after the soldiers came over and banged on your family door and took everyone away, you were all boarded on a train. What happened after that?
Well,
you need help with that?
I got it. We were taken on a journey of 3 days and 2 nights. We were first taken from our home to the horse stables. This was temporary because the camps weren't built yet. To the horse stables of Santa Anita Racetrack.
Yeah. Which is, I should say, very dehumanizing.
There it is.
Where families have to stay in horse stalls.
Flies buzzing in the air and the overwhelming stink of fresh horse manure, insects skittering around on the ground. And that was to be the place where we slept. Everybody taken from that area of Los Angeles were assigned a horse stall to sleep in. They said it's only temporary, that the camps are being built right now. And my baby sister, Reiko, being carried by my mother right over there, promptly got sick. And a few days later, I got sick too. And it was only because of my mother's care and spending time with us, nursing us, that we recovered. We were there for a few months, and then they said, we're moving again. It was a very transient experience, the whole of the internment. And they didn't tell us where we were going, but I, as a kid, I was curious, and I asked my father, where are we going? My father thought for a few seconds, and he said, we're going on a long vacation in the country. And my mother said she heard that it was going to be 3 days and 2 nights, a long journey. We were excited, a vacation in the country and a train ride to boot. So it was going to be a fun experience.
And kudos to your parents that they tried to make it as comfortable or adventurous as possible for you and Henry. I know she packed some snacks.
She what?
She packed some snacks for you.
Oh yeah,
Henry.
that duffel bag that she carried was a wonderful bag on that long journey. She had all sorts of wonderful things there because, you know, riding on a train isn't as exciting as we thought. We were going to the American Southwest, days and days of hot, sweaty, dusty, boring ride, rocking back and forth. But whenever we got bored and Henry and I got into mischief, she would dig in there and find a animal cracker box or a Cracker Jack box or a lollipop or bubble gum, you know, all these wonderful things that she found. And then she would pull out a storybook, a picture book for Daddy to read to us, just like that. And so she made that long journey bearable, tolerable. Although we didn't just have Henry and I crawled under the seats or ran up and down the aisle, and the soldiers would make us go back to our. We had soldiers at both ends of each car, and they were stern, except for one. I still remember. He was always humming a song. Shoo fly, don't bother me. Shoo fly, don't bother me. And so that's the song that I remember from that journey from LA to what turned out to be the swamps of Arkansas. As we, on the third day, by early afternoon, the train started to slow down. And then we saw a barbed wire fence running alongside. They built the camp just parallel to the railroad track.
Let's talk about it. For folks who may not know what they are, could you tell them what an internment camp or incarceration camp is? And I mean, we were talking about earlier, when we see photos of these internment camps now, you know, we see the photos of Ansel Adams, we see Japanese Americans' faces, and they're in school, they're playing baseball, but it lacks the major part of what these camps really were.
The Ansel Adams photos and Dorothea Lange photos, they're wonderful photographers. Ansel Adams' photos of Yosemite. Mm-hmm. They were government-hired photographers. They were forbidden to photograph the two most powerful symbols of our incarceration, the barbed wire fence and the sentry tower. You can look at all the photos of Ansel Adams or Dorothea Lange's work. They're some touching portraits. They were allowed only to take pictures of us, not of our imprisonment. But there was a Los Angeles photographer named Toyo Miyatake. He had a photo studio in downtown LA. And we were forbidden to take anything to record our life within the barbed wire fence. He smuggled in a few lenses wrapped in his underwear. And then once he got to Manzanar, he was incarcerated at Manzanar, he built a box with the lenses that he had smuggled in to make his own photograph. And he captured what I consider to be the most iconic photo coming from the internment camp experience. 3 boys looking longingly beyond the barbed wire fence, but with the barbed wire fence right in front of them. He took the symbols of our imprisonment on film, which Dorothea Lange and Ansel Adams, as wonderful as they are, weren't allowed to do that. Toyo Miyatake got shots of the sentry tower. That's where the stern soldiers, armed soldiers, glared down at us. And from there, when there was some trouble, riots, they shot. And some people were killed from the sentry towers. So Toyo Miyatake is the essential photographer of the internment experience.
We encourage you all to look him up.